Well, hello everybody, and welcome to the Broadcast Network. My name is Tom O'Toole. I'm part of the team here at Broadcast, and I'm bringing you a conversation today with Andy Robinson from Waymaker organisation. And Andy is someone who has led a church for about a decade in Horsham within our movement of churches, New Frontiers. But a few years ago, handed that church on and subsequently has been involved supporting other churches, traveling, and with the charity I mentioned, Waymaker, that he set up. And it is absolutely great to have you with us today. So welcome to the broadcast channel.
Thanks for having me.
So I just give a little couple of kind of biography headlines of things that you've done, but obviously kind of just listing kind of what the different things are doesn't get us to the heart of it. Could you flesh out what I've just shared a bit? Tell us about the journey. Tell us about some of the things that God's done over the years and kind of how He's guided you in different ways on your journey.
Sure. Yeah. About if we go right the way back, I guess when I was about 19 or 20, I kind of felt God speak to me really about full-time ministry, which I was very prepared for, but it took 20 years to get there. So I had 20 years in industry where I was sales and marketing director for multi-billion dollar US software company, which was brilliant fun. I loved it. Got to travel, got to do loads of nice things and all of that kind of stuff. But 20 years in, I felt God speak to me about like giving all of that up and going full time, which was massive because that meant a kind of 75% pay cut and all of that good stuff. But, I'd always felt God called me to that. And so Hazel and I took that step. Hazel was my wife. We've got two boys now in their 30s and both married. But back then, just a young family, really. So that's what we did. I became the youth pastor at what was then King's Church in Horsham, and did that for a couple of years. Became an elder in the church during that time, and then shortly after becoming an elder, was then asked to consider leading the team. Been leading the team there for some like 15 years, I guess, in total, and had a fabulous time. I've always been really passionate about raising up younger leaders and bringing other leaders in. So part of that process was bringing in two amazing young men who are now leading the church. Joss, who took on leadership of the team, and that was always the plan. So I'd always kind of planned for, I guess, succession, that kind of term, I guess, which I think is really important in any job, actually, but I think more so in church organisations, and it's a tough one because for many, you lose the skills that made you once employable in the marketplace. So after 20 years, particularly in sales, you're worthless because your network is your value and your network has long gone. So I'd always had that in the back of my mind. But I think it's important we prepare for that. Otherwise, you end up with this dead man's shoes, whereby older guys are unable to get out of the way, and sometimes I think stay too long. If I'm really honest and being controversial, we stay too long, but simply because where do you go? You've got it's how you feed your family, and I think that just brings an added area of complexity. So I'd always had a plan. I'd already discussed with Joss the idea of him at some point taking on the leadership of the church, and we had a kind of sort of 5-year plan. And the church had gone really well. We'd bought offices and all that kind of stuff, which we've now sold, and got a really good building in the centre of town, which Joss has really led the charge on. But I guess even with a good plan, which we had, circumstances sometimes change and change your plan, or certainly the timing in this case for my plan, because in January 2023 I was diagnosed with terminal stage 4 bowel cancer, and given 2 to 3 years to live. That kind of accelerated the plan in terms of bringing Joss in. But because there was a plan, it actually made that much easier. And so certainly that's kind of facilitated the process of my exit. You mentioned Waymaker, which was a charity that I set up really as part of, I guess, my broader ministry outside a local church. So always been involved very much kind of apostolic ministry. So we're part of the Christ Central sphere of churches. And Jeremy Simpkins had invited me to be part of that team many years before. So I was part of that apostolic team and involved a lot in Africa, particularly in sort of Zambia and in Joseph Mwila and in his world. And Joseph's one of the sort of recognized apostles within New Frontiers. So very much involved in his world. And I really had a heart always to kind of raise and release leaders, but always to release other people as well. And Joseph had a dream to build a kind of Christian school in the city that he was in. And so I set about helping him raise the funds to make that happen. And my trustees, as all good trustees do, said, Andy, there's a lot of money coming through the church books to build this school, many hundreds of thousands of pounds. We think it would be worth you setting up a separate entity to facilitate what you're doing apostolically, which I did. And that was the birth of Waymaker. And it was purely a vehicle, really, at that point, to try and channel funds. And my passion really was to try and avoid the usual trap of churches, which is we all fish in the same ponds for money. So, what happens is, as a church, if you want to do anything, where do you go? You have a gift day, you go to your members, and you ask them to give. And apostolically, usually, if they want to do anything, they go to their church leaders and say, hey, we want to do this. Can you give us some money? And what do the church leaders do? They go back to their members and say, hey, can you give us some money? And so I always kind of felt there was a ceiling, no matter how generous everybody was and could be, there's always a ceiling because you're fishing in one pond for the finance. And so I kind of live a lot of my life in the, well, what if world. And I kind of thought, what if we could raise money, fish in other ponds for money? And that's really what Waymaker has done. So vast majority of the money that we get is from outside of the normal kind of churches asking members to give. And we've been very successful at that, which has been great. But as I say, it was set up as a vehicle for ministry rather than anything else. But as things transpired with my diagnosis, the church was super generous in supporting me for 18 months on a full salary, which is amazing. But I knew that wasn't sustainable, and so I approached the trustees rather than leave it to them to have a very awkward conversation with me about coming off of salaried staff, which I did in 2004, and then took a modest kind of part-time salary from Waymaker. And then in October last year, 2025, I actually stepped down from eldership as well, which was a massive decision, but totally the right thing, to let Joss and Dan and the team carry on leading the church there. And they're doing a magnificent job as I focused really on my cancer treatment. And I've been writing a book about that journey, and it's called The Big C in Me, and that's due to be released soon. But we're focusing on that, and again, all the proceeds from that, not unsurprisingly, going to Waymaker. We want to build a kind of clinic in Africa. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. I'm sure there's tons of questions you can ask me around that. But that's
just listening to that, there's so many different points along the way that we could launch off and go down all sorts of rabbit trails. It sounds so healthy, to be honest. Like the leadership transition being planned for a long time and pretty early, and while you were still young and not at the point of like, oh gosh, what do we do now? Like, I need to hand this on, but there's no one. It's just such a helpful and replicable thing that like, a lot of the people listening to this are in different ministry contexts, like often on the front lines, but getting that thinking of, who's next? Who am I raising up? Either to then go and plant out the next thing and the next thing, and there needs to be that, but also to kind of carry this beyond me carrying it is such a well done thing, it seems. And it sounds like, just hearing you talk about it, that you still being there, having handed it on, seems like it's a positive and healthy and helpful thing, which is sometimes the case and sometimes not the case. So, yeah, well done there. We could have also gone down the route of the finance stuff as well, because I totally resonate with what you're saying there. The same ask to the same people all over again. But I think where we want to focus this conversation is that you mentioned the diagnosis that you'd had back in 2023, and obviously, as you say, you've written about that, and it'd be good to chat more about the book in a minute. But just take us back to that moment. So January 2023, you get that news, and I'm sure there are people listening either who've had similar news themselves or walked with others through those moments. But it's awful. And just tell us, like, what was going on in you then, as you heard that, in the hours, the days, the weeks subsequent to it. Like, what were you feeling? What were you thinking? Like, how did you start to process the news you got there?
Yeah, great question. I mean, it's one of those things that you never really know how you're gonna respond until you're in a situation where you have to respond. I think it's very easy to think, well, I'd like to think I'd do this, or I'd like to think I'd do that. But it's not until you're in that moment that you really kind of realize. And I think one of the things I would say is that, it's not until you're really squeezed that you really know what's on the inside. Because when you get squeezed, what's really inside comes out. And I think, well, I remember vividly the day going for a colonoscopy, which I don't know if I'm allowed to say is basically a camera up the bum, and it's a weird thing because you're conscious although you're sedated, and there's a big camera and a massive great big TV on the screen, and you can't help but watch, because it's massive, and people say, well, why do you watch that? And you just think, I'm a man, there's a television in the room, what are you going to do but other than watch it? And I watched it, and I could see quite quickly that the basic structure of the inside of my bowel, and then I could see some things that didn't look like they were supposed to be there, and I don't know what I'm looking at. So I kind of felt like, even in that moment, that something wasn't right. And I remember sort of getting ready to leave, and being told that Hazel, my wife, and I would meet with the consultant. And I remember saying to Hazel in that moment, like, prepare yourself, because this isn't going to be good news. And sure enough, the consultant came in and said that like me, he'd seen something that shouldn't be there, and his experience told him that was cancer. And in that moment, I have to say, there was a peace that came, that was beyond understanding. And we're all used to hearing those verses, but genuinely, in that moment, there was a peace that came that I cannot explain, describe, or justify, even in the context. And I'm no Greek scholar, but I'd like to think that the Greek word for passes understanding, it is defies. Now, I know it's not, because I've looked it up, but there is that sense of, it defies understanding. It's not just passes it. It's not just that you go past understanding into this peace. There's a peace that happens that is defying the understanding that you have, because everything in you thinks, I should be panicking right now. I should be freaking out right now. and that just wasn't the case. And the reality is that peace has remained ever since. Now, that doesn't mean that I don't, on occasion, disappear down some very dark rabbit holes and have some, times of I guess, depression, in the moment. And sometimes I think that's okay. Just don't stay there. And I think, I can't describe it other than this peace that comes. And the more I've kind of thought about it through this season, Jesus says, I give a peace, not of this world, not as the world gives, but this peace I give you. And you see, the thing is that most of us think of peace, and it is the peace that the world gives, which is essentially the absence of. So peace in that the world gives is the absence of anxiety. It's the absence of trouble. It's the absence of sickness. It's the absence of difficulty. And that, with the absence of all of those things, we think there's peace. But we all know the world we live in. And so the chances of genuinely finding a place where with the absence of all those things is impossible. But Jesus, says that he doesn't bring that kind of peace. And what I've learned is peace is not the absence of anything. It's the presence of someone. And it's the presence of Jesus, the Prince of Peace, that brings peace, that defies understanding. So it's a peace that you think, well, this shouldn't be here because I'm anxious, because I'm sick, because I'm dying, because I've lost my job, because my wife has left me, because my children are spinning out of control. Whatever it is, it defies that. And that doesn't mean that you don't care about the situation and it's not difficult or hard, but there's a peace in it. And I would say that's probably one of the things that kind of defined that journey, and that doesn't mean I still don't ask big questions, and I still didn't have some big questions for God in it all, but it wasn't coming from a place of stress. It was, obviously you've been told you're going to die in the next 3 years. And that's big, that's massive. And you still have to process that and you still have your moments, but that's, I think, the reality of that piece for me anyway.
Yeah, I mean, as you talk about, the different kinds of peace there, my mind went to the story of Jesus in the boat in the storm. And it seems like when the disciples are waking him up, essentially they're saying we need peace, and the only way we can get peace is if all this goes away, all the storm, everything. If we can get rid of that, then maybe we can have peace. But there's Jesus having a nap in the middle of all of that, and it's not that the waters are calm, but yet there's the deep rest, the kind of trust in the Father through it all, isn't there? And
yeah,
it
really
seems like
good
that
example.
resonates.
Yeah, really good.
As we think about this, I know what it's like to have stuff go not my way, not in terms of what we're talking about, but through life we all do, don't we? Different days, different things happen. And I think one of the things that I often do, and one of the things I've definitely seen other people do as well, like as bigger stuff comes along, is ask kind of why. Like we question, don't we? And why me is a thing that we'd often go to. Sometimes like we move it from the why me even to like why God, why are you allowing this, why do you if you're sovereign, why do you let this happen in my life? And I'm sure, I know you were talking about big questions that you would wrestle with. I'm sure those questions must have popped to your mind over the last few years, but I know that they're not the questions that you're choosing to primarily focus on. Just tell us a bit how you've kind of journeyed with some of those questions, like where you've landed instead, what's kind of wrestling in your mind now as you're thinking about things.
Yeah, I mean, I think probably one of the very early questions you're going to ask in my situation is, well, why me? Why why me? And that naturally leads to, what have I done to deserve this? In my context, I've given up everything to follow you. And now here I am, and unable to do the things I want to do. And all those things I want to do are for, quote unquote, the kingdom, are for you. Why is this happening? So definitely the why me question is massive. And I think, all you can do is go to God and ask him, and he's okay with it. I think that's the first thing. It's not unholy or unrighteous or wrong to ask him these kind of massive questions. He's big enough to be able to deal with it. And, he answered. And when I asked him why me, he said, why not you? And as I kind of thought about that, you're thinking, oh, okay. So you're then in, well, what is it that I've done that would qualify me to not be on the end of this, rather than the other way around? And that kind of really made me start to think. And I think the challenge in all of this is that the why me question actually puts you in the position of a victim. And I read a book called The Choice, about a lady that survived the Holocaust and the concentration camps. Amazing book. Not a believer as far as I know, but she says one of the things that she's observed with people that survived that trauma, and the people that didn't, was that the ones that were asking why me, the victims, were the ones that didn't survive. The ones that survived actually asked one important question, and the question they asked wasn't why me, it's what now. And that was something that really captured my thinking, was actually camping out on the why me question is never going to get me anywhere. The real question is what now? Because we can investigate the why me, and I did. Has God given me cancer? No, he hasn't. For so many reasons, he hasn't. I'd take the position that, well, he can't give me what he hasn't got. Where's he? And all good things come from God, and this definitely isn't a good thing. So I think there's that. I think the reality is we live in a fallen world. We live in a cursed world, and it's disasters, sickness, all come as a result of the fall, and we're all subject to the outcome of that. And whilst we know that we're a royal priesthood, we're not a protected species as Christians. And we get sick, we suffer disasters, the same as anybody else. So it's not, me having cancer is not as a result of anything I've done. God's not punishing me because Jesus has paid the price. He's not punishing me. He's not. I think the other thing is people would often say, well, maybe God's trying to teach you a lesson. And let me kind of qualify that by saying, can I learn lessons through this? Can God teach me lessons through this? Answer, yes, he can. Has he brought it about in order for me to learn a lesson? Answer, no. And the best example I can give you of that is as a very imperfect father, and reflection of a poor reflection of our heavenly Father. But as an earthly father, I taught my boys to ride their bicycles, and outside the house on the street, we live in a tiny little close and on a slight hill. Now, I'm a motorcyclist myself, so I know that actually we learn more through our mistakes and when things go wrong than when everything goes right. And so I knew that my boys would learn more, if they yanked on the brake and went over the handlebars, or if they went too fast and fell off. I knew that they would learn more. But what if they didn't fall off? Because then that valuable lesson that I think they'd learn wouldn't happen. But I'm not going to push them off so they can learn the lesson. If they fall off, as a good father, I'll teach them I'll help them learn the lesson, but I'm not going to push them off so they can learn the lesson. And I think it's a very poor reflection of the reality, but I think that's the same. That's the same with God. And, you know, in his, there's a futility in the earth. There's that sense of good things and bad things happen to good and bad people. It is. So we're not protected. But I think my life is protected in the sovereignty of God. So there's nothing that happens in my life that's outside of his sovereignty. And that's a massive subject to go into. But so I think there's that sense of, you know, we live in a fallen world, bad things happen to good people, but equally there's a confidence in the sovereignty of God, that nothing happens in my life outside of his sovereignty. So if we can work that through, and then we end up with the what now, then I think you end up somewhere much more healthy. So whatever situation you're in, whatever difficulty you're facing, yes, ask the why me questions for sure, but don't stay there. Step into the, well, what now? So we are where we are. It is what it is. So what now? God, what are we gonna do now? You know, and for me, part of that questioning was actually seeing many things in the Bible in a way I'd not seen them before. You know, a biggie for me is, you know, where it talks about God has numbered my days before the creation of the world. And I've read that hundreds of times, and I'm sure you have, and many people listening to this will have read it, and you think, oh, that's nice. Do you know what I mean? That makes me feel good about myself. I was, you know, in Father's mind and heart back there. Oh, how lovely. And it is. It's great. Do you know what I mean? But actually I was confronted with a situation where someone had put a number on those days. The 2 to 3 years. And it's not very long. It's like 1,000 days. It's not massively long. And I had to come to the place where I'm like, well, has God numbered my days? And does cancer get any say in that? And I get to the point where, no, you know, God's numbered my days, and cancer will not rob one of those. The cancer cannot steal a day from the number that God set. And I think when you can get to that place, for me anyway, there's the what now is very much about, well, what now is I've got today. That I know. And so, Jesus, what are we going to do today? And that for me is where that kind of what now has led me. And so, you know, every morning, you know, I open my eyes, have a quick look around, make sure I'm alive. I'm alive. Today's going to be a good day. Because that's really where I am. And for those people that are sitting there doing the maths on their fingers, will realize that I'm already in year 4 of the 3 years that they gave me. And you can see me, Tom, so you know that you know I'm not that. I've got a perfect face for a podcast.
You're looking good.
But I feel okay, you know, and God's been really good. So, you know, I think there's that, you know, waking up every day and saying, okay, Jesus, what are we going to do today? What's today going to look like? And, you know, I kind of not Bill Gates is, I'm a big fan of Apple and all things Apple. And I was reading the story of Apple, and in there, so the guy who leads it, just gone right out of my head. I set it up right. Yeah, Steve Jobs. Sorry, thanks, Tom. I was reading his biography, and he said this. You know, he goes, we don't know if today is our last day on Earth, but if it was, would you do what is in your diary to do? And he says, and if the answer to that question is no, too many days in a row, something needs to change. That's good. And I love that. And that's really been part of this process. And you get to the what now, is that sense of, you know, how do I make today count? What's it going to be? What difference am I going to make in the world today? And, you know, that's really helped with taking risks, you know, whether that's coming off a staff, whether that's putting down eldership, whether that's doing whatever, even in terms of witnessing and telling people about Jesus. You think, what's the worst thing that can happen is they might think I'm an idiot because I believe in Jesus. Do you know what I mean? Or tomorrow I could wake up dead. I mean, when you're comparing those things, suddenly it's not a big deal if someone goes, "You're an idiot." And so I've had more opportunities, amazing opportunities to share Jesus in the last 3 or 4 years than probably in the 10 before it, because of that kind of, okay, what now? Okay, Jesus, what are we going to do today? Kind of attitude. So, that would be my encouragement to people: is yes, ask the big questions, but again, don't stay there. Sometimes you have to go, I don't understand. I don't fully understand, but we are where we are. So what now?
Yeah, that's so good, and that's such a well nuanced way to hold all this together. We don't serve people well, do we? When we set an expectation of the Christian life that nothing will go wrong. The cliche is the health, wealth, and prosperity, but there are
Yeah,
more subtle ways of doing it than the kind of really overt stuff. I mean, even when we get good news and our response is, God is good. It's like, well, he is, isn't he? But he's also good when the news is bad. Like, it's
yeah.
not a conditional thing. And yet, when we layer that into ourselves, then the moment something doesn't go well, then we are going to gravitate to the, oh gosh, is this for me thing? Why me? Like, what's gone wrong? I love the what next as the big question that you pivot into.
I mean, I think the thing is I would say, God's goodness, my circumstances are not a barometer of God's goodness,
Absolutely.
and that's certainly the reality of it for me.
Yeah. Yeah. So you've written a book about your experience, and this book is coming out, I think the 7th of April, and it's called The Big C in Me. And of course, like the big C, when we hear that phrase, is often used to refer to cancer. And I think you're doing something a bit different, aren't you, though, in the title there? Like, tell us why you chose the title, what you're trying to convey and communicate there.
Yeah, I think, I mean, it's really strange, isn't it? Cancer is I think just strikes fear into people, whoever they are. And I guess from a cultural point of view, people tend to prefer to sort of say the big C rather than use the word cancer. And one of the things that I kind of pondered through this process very early on, and a verse that I would say, has become my life verse, is Colossians 1:27, which is Christ in me, the hope of glory. And so when I chose that title, I kind of flipped it a bit, to say, actually, no, Christ in me is the big C in me. He's the big C. Cancer is just a small c, just a little c. And so I've used that to kind of play on the big C cancer thing that people naturally gravitate to, but use it to open many doors into conversation to talk about, actually, no, Christ in me, the hope of glory. And I've actually got that verse, it's tattooed on my arm, which interestingly has opened so many opportunities for conversation, because particularly in hospital, and particularly when you're having operations and stuff, you don't have any clothes on, just a gown. And so the only thing you've got with you is anything that may be written on your body. And so I have it tattooed on my forearm. And just a very recent example of that was, I've just had sort of major lung surgery where the cancer that I had in my bowel, which was bowel cancer, had metastasized, spread to my liver and to my lungs. And so I was having an operation on my lungs, and I came out of surgery into the kind of recovery room. So you're literally just coming round after the general anesthetic. And this nurse was there, kind of just keeping an eye on me, and she looked at my other arm, not the arm with that on. I've got another verse on that arm, and she said, "Oh, that's lovely." And I said, "Oh, thank you. Great." I said, "Wait till you see the other one." And then she looked at the other arm and saw it said, Christ in me, the hope of glory. And I just was able to just share to say that, I said, Jesus is my hope. Christ is my hope. Cancer is not the big C. And I went through that story with her, talked to her about how, God's numbered my days, not cancer, all of this. And she was great. She was, okay. And then off she went to treat with another patient. And then when she came back with a friend, and she said, this is Andy. And he tells me that God's numbered his days, not cancer, that Christ's his hope of glory. And she basically recounted my testimony that I'd just given to her friend. And she was saying, it's amazing what Andy, and she was off. And it kind of reminded me a little bit of, when Jesus was at the well and the woman said, can't hear the man that told me everything I ever did. You're thinking, did he really tell you everything he ever did? But it was that kind of she was just caught up. And just before I left, still having the anesthetic wearing off, she just came over and she'd leant in and she said to me, it's just you and me here, right? And I'm like, yes. And she said, my hope is that I could get pregnant. I'm desperate to be a mum, but I can't get pregnant. And I was just like, well, let's pray, because I've got people praying for me, and that's why I'm still alive. And we'll pray for you. And it was just that amazing moment just there for her to realize that she had a hope that wasn't Jesus. And we could be here all day with stories like that, where that the opportunities are there. I'm just not scared as I maybe might have been in the past to take them. And I wouldn't want to have what I've got. But there have been many opportunities. I've had builders in the house. I had one guy who's builders on the house for a week, and one of the young lads, I mean, these are proper builders, and one morning, one of the guys, I guess he's in his 30s, just sort of came and said, oh, I saw you last night. And I'm like, what? And he said, yeah, on TikTok. And you can find me on all these platforms on the big C in me. And he said, yeah. And then he just started crying. And I'm like, what, are you okay? And he's like, yeah, my dad's got what you've got. And I'm like, oh my goodness, I'm so sorry. And he goes, yeah, but he's not dealing with it like you're dealing with it. And I said, well, maybe he just hasn't got the hope that I've got. And he was like, well, what hope is that? And bang, there's an opportunity for the gospel. So, there's a lot going on. And I guess that was really kind of part of wanting to share the story of the Big C and Me book, if you like, was just opportunities for those kind of stories, but also to really ask those big questions and delve into the why me and the what now, and how can God be good when life isn't, and all of those real questions, because it's not all sweetness and light, and I can't stand those books that are just like everything's rosy. We disappeared down some dark rabbit holes at times, and I'm very open about that, both on my social media and in the book. I think it's really important to kind of recognize that. And I think as well, maybe for people reading it that are not maybe have cancer themselves, but are walking alongside people who are, whether that's family, friends, or even in a church context as a pastor, to understand what's going on inside and what you're really thinking about. And to do that, you've got to be honest. You've got to be really open about that. And I am, very much in the book, just to kind of allow you to get inside the thinking, really. And as I say, sometimes it's okay to, there are days when I just have a good cry. I'm just sad, and it suddenly kind of hits you in that moment, and you're like, unless God does something, my life almost certainly will be shorter than I planned. It may not be, the 3 years that the doctors had given. But you don't, there's times when you're going, well, what if their number and God's number's the same? You do sort of go down some of those places. And I think it's really important to do that. And even with sharing some of the stuff from my wife, because she processes things very different to me. and it's not actually happening to her. She's observing it happening to somebody else. And she would always say she's a few paces behind me usually, but she's a pharmacist, so she's a medic, and I guess she would probably hold on to, and I talk about this in the book. In Romans, when it talks about Abraham, and it says that Abraham considered the facts
Mm.
that his body was as good as dead, yet without wavering in his faith, he believed the promises of God. And that's really where she sits and where I sit a lot of the time. There are days when you consider the facts and it doesn't look good, and that's okay. But there is that sense of hanging on to it without wavering in your faith. You believe in the promises of God, that he's good all the time, and that he's got good plans for us. And so I think there's that, I think walking something like this probably is holding the tensions and the paradoxes that exist, and they're there, and let's not hide from them, but they're there. But you have to walk that tightrope.
Yeah, but I'm loving that how proactive you're being. It's linked, I guess, with the what next, but seeing the moments that are before you, not what you'd have chosen, but still the opportunities in them to do good, to be a blessing, to share your faith, to make a difference in the stories of other people, whether it's the nurse at the hospital, the builder in your home, whoever it may be. And I know the book is part of that as well, both through the testimony it gives, the way you're using your story to equip others. Also, how the book is being a vehicle to support what you're doing through Waymaker as well. I know the proceeds from the book are going to be kind of channeled into that and getting that clinic built there and serving through that. But tell us then, we've kind of skirted around the book quite a lot, but we know it's launching early April. Tell us a bit about kind of that launch. I think you've got a launch party coming up. If there are people interested in reading more of this and in digging in, like what are some of the things they can do, kind of how to get connected into all of that?
Yeah, great. Well, so the book goes live formally on Amazon on the 7th of April, and then on the 11th of April in Horsham, we're having a launch party. So anybody and everybody is welcome. There's a kind of wine reception with canapes. Lou Fellingham's going to be hosting it. There'll be live music, readings from the book, some Q&A, all of that kind of good stuff to really launch it. And as you say, all of the proceeds from the book, this is not an opportunity for me to make a quick buck before I die. All of the proceeds from this are going to Waymaker, and we want to build a clinic in Africa. And the reason for that, and you can read about that in the book, is that I stupidly asked one of my African friends when I was in Africa. I just said, "Oh, how does your kind of national health system work? What?" And he just looked at me and he said, "We trust God or die." And interestingly, I've used that phrase because once, basically the doctors have said that my situation is treatable, not curable. So they can treat it and keep me alive as long as they can, but they can't cure it. And so, I found myself on the African health system, trust God or die. And, like me, all of this, rather than the why me, hit the what now? What now then? Okay, well, what now is we can use all the proceeds from this to build a clinic. One of the things you'll read in the book is that I've stolen a phrase from a friend of mine, Paul Manwaring, who wrote the foreword for the book. And he says the best of Jesus and the best of medicine. And I use that a lot. And, for me, I have that choice. I'm able to believe for the best of Jesus and the best of medicine. But my friends in Africa can't. They have no choice. It's trust God or die. And so there's an opportunity for us to kind of raise money and build a clinic so they are able to see the best of medicine and the best of Jesus. So all of the proceeds from the book, the proceeds on the night, I'm not even asking people to buy the book. I'm asking them to make a donation to Waymaker to build that clinic and take a book with the donation. So there's all of that. I think the other thing as well is that one thing that I've noticed, and my editors looking at the book when I wrote it, there's a chapter that talks about just the wonder of me having friends, having a church community around me. I've had what I call my prayer warriors, which are like 10 people that have prayed hands-on with me face to face every week for all of this time. And when they read it, the editors, they said, well, that's great for you, but if I'm reading that, what about me? And I thought, man alive, yeah, what about, people? So we've actually set up an online community that's operational now called the Big C and Me Live. And whilst you can go on TikTok and you can go on YouTube and you can listen to mine and other people's kind of stories, it's a one-way conversation. You're just listening to whatever it is I'm telling you, and that may answer your questions and it may not. And so what we've done is we've created this community whereby everyone can be part of the conversation. And so there's like a post area where you can post questions and testimonies and all that, and people can chip in. But we also run live video conferencing, kind of coffee mornings, coffee hours, different things where we just, if you're around, you just hang out and chat, and we talk about some of the challenges of treatment and of surgeries and all of that. And I've been really blessed with a lot of great friends, surgeons, cancer specialists, people I know, who will come on and they'll do Q&A with us, and all of that. So if you go to thebigcandme.org, you'll find all of this. You'll find access to get the free tickets for the launch. You can find out more about the Big C and Me book, and you can find access to this community, which again is free, particularly for people walking down that road of having cancer or having had it. But that's operational and that's working really, really well. And it encourage people just to come and join and be part of that. Please buy the book. It will be available on Amazon, or alternatively come to the launch. We'd love to see you, and it'll be a great opportunity for that.
Great. We will make sure we get the links out to the book, but also to the community there in the show notes as well. So anyone listening who wants to check it out easily can just have a look there and follow the links through. But Andy, it's been so inspiring chatting, so powerful to hear the journey of how God's been working in you in the midst of what you've been walking through these last few years. And I think this conversation is going to be a real blessing to people who are listening. And that'll be people who maybe they're in the same situation, maybe they're not, but they know and are walking with people who are, or maybe it's kind of preparatory work, isn't it, for who knows what the future holds for any of us. But thank you so much for giving your time. Bless you with what you're doing. And the book launch coming up soon as we're having the conversation, maybe soon for you as you're listening, or maybe it's in the past if you're listening a bit further down the road. But do check out the book and do check out Andy's ministry around it. Thanks so much, everyone, for listening to us. And we'll see you next time on broadcast.
Thank you.